250 years ago, it didn't even exist. There was no United States. Just a scattered string of struggling colonies clinging to the edge of a vast, unknown wilderness. Colonies so desperate that in their earliest days, settlers starved to death by the hundreds through brutal winters. These were people barely surviving on the far edge of the world. And yet, in the blink of an eye, by the standards of history, that fragile collection of settlements would rise to become the single most powerful nation the world has ever seen. A country that would defeat the mightiest empire on earth, double its own size with the stroke of a pen, tear itself apart in a horrific civil war and survive, win 2 world wars, land human beings on the moon, and end up ruling the global economy. How on earth did that happen? How did a starving colony transform into a superpower in less than 250 years? It's one of the most incredible rise stories in all of human history, and it's filled with dramatic turning points, desperate gambles, dark chapters, and moments that change the entire course of the world. So today, we're walking through the 10 pivotal moments that built America, the events that took it from nothing to the top of the world. And I promise you, some of these stories are far stranger and more dramatic than you were ever taught. So stick around to the very end, because the final moment is the one that made America the most powerful country on the planet. This is Histalgia, where history comes alive. So before we begin, do yourself a favor and tap that subscribe button right now so you never miss a story like this one. Trust me, you'll want to be here. All right, let's go back to the very beginning. Our story begins over 400 years ago, long before there was any America. Europeans began crossing the Atlantic Ocean to settle in a land that was already home to millions of Native Americans, who had lived across these lands for thousands of years, with rich and ancient cultures of their own. The early European settlements were desperate, dangerous places. Take Jamestown, founded in 1607 as the first permanent English settlement. Its early years were absolutely brutal. The settlers faced disease, hunger, and hardship they were completely unprepared for. During one terrible winter, remembered as the starving time, the vast majority of the colonists died. These were not conquerors striding confidently into a new world. They were people barely clinging to survival. Then, in 1620, another famous group arrived. The Pilgrims, seeking religious freedom, landing on the harsh northern coast. That first winter, many of them died too. Those who survived did so partly with the help of the native peoples who taught them how to farm the unfamiliar land. Slowly, painfully, over many decades, more and more settlements took root along the coast, growing into 13 British colonies. But these colonies were not their own country. They were ruled from across the ocean by the King of Britain, and a deep resentment was quietly beginning to build. Because the colonists were starting to feel they were being taxed and controlled by a distant king who didn't represent them at all. That anger was about to explode into something world-changing. By the 1770s, the tension between the 13 colonies and the British Crown had reached a boiling point. The colonists were furious about being taxed by a government thousands of miles away in which they had no voice. And they decided to do something almost unthinkable: to break away from the most powerful empire on the entire planet. On the 4th of July, 1776, they made it official. They signed the Declaration of Independence, a bold document announcing that the 13 colonies were now free and independent states, no longer under British rule. It contained a revolutionary idea that would echo around the world, that all people are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But declaring independence was one thing. Winning it was another. Because Britain was not going to let its colonies go without a fight. What followed was the American Revolutionary War, a long, brutal struggle in which a ragtag American army, led by George Washington, took on the professional might of the British Empire. By any logic, the Americans should have lost. They were outgunned, underfunded, and outmatched. They suffered crushing defeats and brutal winters where soldiers froze and starved. But against staggering odds and with crucial help from France, they endured, and eventually they won. The impossible had happened. A new nation, the United States of America, was truly born. So let me ask you this: if you had been alive back then, Would you have had the courage to take up arms against the most powerful empire in the world for a chance at freedom? Let me know in the comments. Now, this brand new nation had to figure out how to actually govern itself. Winning independence created a huge new problem. 13 former colonies were now free. But how would they unite and govern themselves? Their first attempt at a national government was weak and barely functional. And the young country was in danger of falling apart before it even got started, though. So in 1787, the nation's leaders gathered and did something remarkable. They wrote the United States Constitution, a blueprint for an entirely new kind of government. It created a system carefully designed to prevent any single person, like a king, from ever gaining absolute power, by dividing authority into different branches that would balance each other. This document was revolutionary for its time. And here's what makes it so extraordinary. It's still in use today. The US Constitution is the oldest written national constitution still governing a country anywhere in the world. For more than 230 years, through wars, crises, and massive change, America has been run by the framework laid down in that single document. It wasn't perfect. Far from it, as we'll see. But it was durable. It created a stable foundation that would allow the young nation to grow. And grow it did, because America was about to get a whole lot bigger. Almost overnight. Asterisk in the early 1800s. The United States was still a fairly narrow country, hugging the eastern side of the continent. To the west lay a vast, enormous territory controlled by France. And then, in 1803, came one of the most stunning deals in the history of the world. France, needing money, offered to sell this gigantic stretch of land to the United States. And America jumped at it. In a single transaction known as the Louisiana Purchase, the United States bought an area so massive that it doubled the size of the entire country overnight. And the price? It worked out to just a few cents per acre. An almost unbelievable bargain for hundreds of thousands of square miles of land. Don't think about that. With the stroke of a pen and a payment that, in the grand scheme of things, was tiny, the United States suddenly became twice as large. It's often called one of the greatest real estate deals ever made. This new land opened up a colossal frontier of forests, plains, rivers, and mountains, stretching far to the west. And this set the stage for the next great chapter of American history, the dramatic and often dark push westward across the continent. Because now that America had all this new land, its people were determined to spread across it, all the way to the distant Pacific Ocean. Throughout the 1800s, waves of Americans pushed westward across the continent, chasing land, opportunity, and the dream of a fresh start. This era gave rise to the legendary image of the American frontier, the Wild West of pioneers. Cowboys, gold rushes, and boom towns, but we have to be honest about this chapter, because it has a deeply tragic side. This westward expansion came at a terrible cost to the native American peoples who had lived on these lands for thousands of years. As settlers moved in, indigenous nations were pushed off their ancestral homes, forced onto distant reservations, and devastated by broken promises, conflict, and disease. It's one of the darkest and most painful parts of American history, and it should never be forgotten. The expansion itself was staggering in scale. And in 1869, it reached a landmark moment with the completion of the first transcontinental railroad, a railway that finally connected the east and west coast of the country. Suddenly, a journey across the continent that had once taken months of dangerous travel could be done in a matter of days. The railroad stitched the enormous country together and unleashed a wave of growth, trade, and movement. By now, America stretched from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific, a true continental nation. But even as it grew, a deep and terrible crisis was building within it, one that would nearly destroy the country entirely. For all its growth, the United States carried a deep and horrific wound at its core: slavery. Millions of black people had been enslaved, forced into brutal labor, their freedom and humanity stripped away. It was a monstrous injustice, completely at odds with the nation's own stated ideals that all people are created equal. By the 1860s, this issue tore the country in two. The northern and southern states were bitterly divided above all over slavery. And in 1861, the disagreement exploded into the American Civil War, a devastating conflict in which the nation quite literally went to war with itself. north against south. After the Civil War, the United States entered an era of explosive growth and transformation. This was the age of industry. Factories, steel mills, and railroads spread across the nation. Great cities swelled with people, and skyscrapers began to reach for the sky. America was rapidly becoming one of the most powerful industrial economies on Earth. And fueling this incredible boom was one of the largest waves of immigration in human history. Millions upon millions of people from all over the world, especially from Europe, poured into the United States, chasing the promise of a better life. Many of them arrived by ship, passing through the famous immigration station at Ellis Island. In the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, which stood as a beacon of hope welcoming newcomers to a new land. These immigrants provided the workforce that powered America's factories and built its cities. They brought their cultures, their languages, and their dreams, weaving them into the fabric of the nation. This is the era that truly cemented America as a melting pot. A country built from people of every background on Earth. By the early 1900s, the transformation was astonishing. The struggling colonies of the past were long gone. In their place stood a booming industrial powerhouse with a rapidly growing population and an economy that was starting to rival the great powers of Europe. And soon, events on the world stage would thrust this rising giant into a role it had never played before, a leader of the entire world. For much of its early history, the United States had tried to stay out of the conflicts of Europe and the wider world. But in the 20th century, that would change forever, and it would change America's place in the world completely. When the great global conflicts of the world wars erupted, America was eventually drawn in, and its enormous industrial might and manpower proved decisive. In the Second World War especially, following a surprise attack that pulled the nation into the fighting, America mobilized on an incredible scale. Its factories churned out weapons, ships, and planes at a staggering rate. And its soldiers fought in enormous battles across the globe. By the time the war ended in 1945, the world had been reshaped. Much of Europe and Asia lay devastated and exhausted. But the United States emerged from the war stronger than ever, its homeland largely untouched, its economy booming, and its military the most powerful on the planet. In the span of a few short years, America had gone from a nation that avoided world affairs to one of the two dominant superpowers on Earth. The country that had begun as starving colonies was now a global leader, its influence stretching across the entire world. But it wasn't alone at the top. It now faced a rival superpower, and their tense standoff would define the next 50 years, and even push humanity all the way to the moon. After the Second World War, the world split into two rival camps, led by two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. For decades, these two giants were locked in a tense standoff known as the Cold War, a rivalry of ideologies, military might, and global influence, always shadowed by the terrifying threat of nuclear weapons. This intense competition spilled over into an epic contest to conquer space itself, the space race. Both nations poured resources into reaching the stars, each desperate to prove its superiority, and it built to one of the greatest moments in all of human history. In 1969, it built to one of the greatest moments in 1969, the United States achieved the impossible. Its space program landed astronauts on the surface of the moon, and a human being walked on another world for the very first time. The entire planet watched in awe. To this day, the United States remains the only nation ever to have put people on the moon. It was a triumph that symbolized just how far this young country had come from a starving colony to reaching beyond the Earth itself. And now we come to the final moment, the one that made America the most powerful nation on the planet. For decades, the United States and the Soviet Union stood as equals at the top of the world. But in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed and dissolved. And just like that, one of the two superpowers was gone. The United States was left standing completely alone at the summit of global power, the world's single remaining superpower. Its military was unmatched. Its economy became the largest on Earth. Its culture, its movies, its brands, and its technology spread into every corner of the globe. And its money, the US dollar, became the currency of the entire world economy. giving America quiet influence over nearly every nation. In the decades that followed, America led the way into the digital age, giving the world the internet, Silicon Valley, and the technology that now defines modern life. From a handful of starving settlers clinging to a wilderness coast, to the most powerful and influential nation the world has ever known, all in less than 250 years. It is, without question, one of the most remarkable rise stories in the history of humanity. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these 10 moments do you think was the most important turning point in America's rise? And is there a moment you would have added to the list? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this journey through American history, do me one quick favor and hit that subscribe button, because here on Histalgia, we bring the greatest and most fascinating stories of history to life, one video at a time. And I promise you, you do not want to miss what's coming next. And now it's your turn. Which country's history should I tell next? Comment down below with the nation you want to see. And if I choose your idea, it could be the very next video here on Histalgia. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Histalgia, and I'll see you in the next story.